the perpetrators happen to be Black. And I feel like this has to be talked about.
They are getting racially profiled as easy victims.
Black people who are perpetrating these crimes on news, and that's the thing that trends, is because that's an easy, digestible narrative to push.
What goes viral on social media is not necessarily what's true, but what causes conflict.
We are now asking the world to understand our shared experiences and what we are seeing every single day.
Throwing that to the side and saying, I'm a human being. Can we work together like that?
It has to come from the bottom, right? And that's what we're doing.
I mean, my own grandma was knocked down and robbed by a Black dude in Chicago.
You know, we also have rallies and protests. It would be amazing for you to show up.
We don't have control over our own damn children. Can we speak up more about it?
I was coming into tonight really emotional and stressed because I didn't know which way it would go.
Over the last couple of years, there's been a huge rise in violent Black on Asian street crime in major US cities. And for the purpose of this video, when I say Asian, I mean that in the US sense, as in East Asian and Southeast Asian, or Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, and Filipino, and others, too many to list. And what the Asian American community is getting increasingly upset about is their observation that there doesn't seem to be any concern among other communities for what they're going through. Unlike what we saw with BLM, many people feel that when they talk about their subject, they're being gaslit and told that the problem doesn't exist, it's concocted by the media. But there are people who live in these communities who are witnessing this violence all the time, and we're not hearing from them. Why is that? So I was really pleased to have been invited to share my thoughts on this in a Zoom chat organized by a group called Dear Community, a non-profit Asian advocacy group based in San Francisco. The event was a collaboration between Dear Community and a comedy group called Crazy Woke Asians to bring together people from the Black and Asian communities to come together and try and find some solidarity on this issue. So I'm going to be sharing with you over the next 45 minutes or so an uninterrupted recording of the conversation that took place. There were quite a few voices involved, so unfortunately I didn't actually get to say that much myself. So at the end of the conversation, I'm going to summarize what I got out of it and talk a little bit more about what I think the real issue is.
So Dear Community started with the citizen patrols, and now we've evolved into a nonprofit based in San Francisco that hosts events to build community and to amplify the Asian American voice through arts and supporting local businesses. I feel like Black on Asian tension is something that is not talked about enough, and it's not encouraged, basically. And I get most of my news from, people talking in the community, things that they personally experienced. And I feel like there is a divide, and a lot of the incidents that happen to Asian Americans in San Francisco, the perpetrators happen to be Black. And I feel like this has to be talked about. We can first acknowledge it and then talk about why that is happening.
A lot of times, a lot of my prejudices determine on how I deal with people. And even when I see them, I still have to be able to reject them when I see it's coming up, and I have to move them to the side. And I know how I was taught about Asian community, and even I came from the South. So when I came to San Francisco, looking at true Asians was a wholly different thing for me. And the first thing I personally felt when I came was that they were afraid of me. And I mean, it wasn't nothing new, but I would say, damn, the Asians too, they're afraid of me also. You're always used to it from white people, but it was just that. And then when I had to think about it, I had to think about how we were perceived on TV, how we were perceived on media, and how a lot of times they hadn't seen me. Now, I'm from an older generation, so I was perceived that Asians always had money. They kept money. They didn't believe in banks, and they always had it. So anytime you wanted to hit a lick, that's who you would go and hit. It had nothing to do necessarily with Asian hate.
Or even if you want to look at all those cases that they kind of put on the news, it's typically people suffering from some sort of mental illness. which is no excuse for violence, which is no excuse for xenophobia, which is no excuse for racism. But when that's the control group that you're working with, the narrative isn't all there. Once again, just to say that, this is all extremely tragic and unacceptable. I feel the way that we talk about it and intentionally talking about what factors are actually at play does more to help.
Although I am all the way over here in the UK, I do feel very connected to this issue because I have family living in the States. And in the 80s and 90s, I lived in Vancouver and I spent a lot of time in LA, and I often visited Seattle. So that part of the world is very close to my heart. And I kind of remember all these West Coast cities as being, they called it the jewel of the Pacific back in the 80s and 90s. They were like paradise. And it's really sad for me to watch these places decline when you've got socioeconomic problems like this taking place in your city. You've got to be able to challenge your government. It doesn't matter which side you voted for. And I find that a lot of the reason why this gets swept under the carpet is because a lot of the people living in these cities voted for a Democrat government and don't want to challenge it because they like to believe that they made the right choice and that they can do no wrong. But you've got to be able to hold your government to account no matter who they are.
I'm an individual, which I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm 47, we'll be 48 this year. And, just wanted to share my story. When I grew up, I lived in various parts of San Francisco, in the hood. I have Black friends. And we had even like in Chinatown, it's called the Pingyun. And these towers where we have people of all sorts of ethnicities. And, we were never really, luckily for me, I was never exposed to what's happening in the world right now. And as I got older, I learned that much of people's actions are influenced by environmental influences, media enticement, educated and uneducated, how people were brought up. And growing up too, there was a man in Chinatown, there was a Black man. He went by the name of Tiger, and he was selling fruits. He'd be like, and so a lot of what we see now today is completely different when I was growing up. And so I do believe also that a lot of people's actions have been influenced by, I don't know how you call it, whether it's television or social media. And a lot of times they can easily be moved to act a certain way. But in other cultures, now I've been to other countries where I lived in Toronto for a period of time too. And when I went there, it was a huge culture shock for me because it was like there was more multicultural families than I saw here growing up in the States.
What's classed as hate crime, there's got to be a very clear racial hatred motive in it. Especially during the pandemic, we all saw that there was a big rise in white on Asian hate, all this Kung flu stuff and just verbal abuse. And a lot of these got reported and they went down in the statistics as hate crime. But then the violence that we're seeing in neighborhoods where you've got people at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, the drug abuse and mental health issues in quite a few cities, the Chinese elderly community is right smack in the middle of that. So they are getting targeted, getting racially profiled as easy victims. A lot of the time, it's just a mugging. It's not a hate crime. So there's no element of racial hatred there, but there's a racial profiling element. They're known to be carrying cash. These don't get recorded as hate crimes. They're just ordinary crime. It's not given the same priority as hate crimes. And so they get kicked into the long grass and not dealt with. Whereas hate crimes the hate crime unit is much more heavily resourced and these things are prioritized. They get dealt with and they get recorded in the statistics. And so I think it skews the reality of what's happening on the streets.
Yeah. So, Donnie, in response to the discrepancy that you feel kind of makes up the entire. First things first, I hate the cops, ACAB 1312. I think that's the root of all this. I can just say capitalism. Conversation's over. What's the issue? Capitalism. Full stop. African Americans and Black Americans make up about 14% of the entire population of the United States. So it's always going to be lower. The way, and just the fact that you see so many, Black people who are perpetrating these crimes on news, and that's the thing that trends, is because that's an easy, digestible narrative to push. I going back to saying like there are more white people that are the perpetrators of these crimes just makes sense, full stop. Historically speaking, that makes sense. I mean, look at any military base owned by the United States on a map. That explains it as it is. Look at the cases going on with the assaults over in Japan by station soldiers over there. Like that's 2024 stuff. And what it all comes to is just kind of like the way that we want to define hate crime can go us any which way. Because once again, the main people that are reporting these crimes, or even like putting these up, aren't taking in all of them, aren't doing their best. And more often than not, the people that we leave in charge to deal with this don't solve these crimes. They're not solved. People are still hurt. Communities are still reeling with the main issue of, as you said, like most of these aren't hate crimes, they're muggings. We can look at the simple question is, why are people mugging people? Why is that such a common resource for anybody of any race, any background, who are regulated to this socioeconomic class? Why is that the easiest way to go about it? And the same thing as far as just like gentrification and the way that it's commonly used, or from the base term of the word, which is pretty much people being too old and being pushed out because they can't afford it. And that mostly is going to affect people without generational wealth, people who have multiple generations living under the same roof. And that is going to be most often Asian Americans and or immigrants that have that home setup. And the same thing for people who don't rely on systems or institutions like banks. So there are so many things interwoven with one another that the easiest scapegoat in all this is just, default to the anti-Blackness thing of kind of like, Black people are X, the most people that cause crime, you probably heard that the people who cause the most crime are Black people, even though, which is false. But then you can even go into the question of, well, define crime. Why is it that if one person does this thing, it's a crime, but if another person does this thing, if they have enough money, it's not a crime?
Go around and around with all the things that's been done to us, what we've experienced, what we've seen. I think we all got a story here. I've heard everybody's. I resonate with you guys. So I wrote in the chat that until we take care of something from the top down, the bottom ain't going to change. It's designed to be divisive. Supposed to divide you against me and me against you, and I got my problems, you got your problems. Heck, to even get something together like this is damn near impossible. And we're not going to do this again tomorrow. Try to get everybody here again tomorrow at the same time. It ain't happening. So you guys already know they got us divided because I got to get mine. I got mine to do. So what can we do about this? Since they're working so hard at the top, and pay attention to the top works together. They don't do the same like the bottom. The bottom's busy dividing. So what we have to do, if you want a strategy, is try to scaffold this thing from the bottom up, trying to connect the people that have the most influence, that can reach the most closest to the top, and work from that angle so that it trickles on down quicker to the bottom. Otherwise, it's going to be around. This has been going on for hundreds of years, man. It's just continued propaganda, like my man said earlier. Honey's right. So that's what I'm proposing. Try to figure out who your leaders are, who's the people's in powerful positions that are closer to the top that can help change and create different narratives for the bottom. Because otherwise, we play this game already. I've seen this too many times. And I feel it. That's why I'm here in this kind of setting. My buddy told me about it. I was like, I started talking. He's like, you need to show up. I was like, all right, I'm here. So I feel you guys. I got nothing but love for the Asians. I didn't know there's a real problem, man. I don't watch news, but apparently there's an issue. And that's what I'm saying. It's what we are getting as information, we're just turning around and projecting it back onto ourselves. We're like, oh yeah, it must be a problem. They're against us. We're against them. Next thing you know, we start promoting that. We start projecting it. That's our reality. But otherwise, I would have never known some of the things y'all said tonight. I'm glad to hear it, but I also don't want to create some of the bad realities either.
I want to acknowledge Lane's frustration. I can hear it, and I think we all feel that at times. And when I read what you typed in the chat about like it has to be top down, my immediate reaction was like, yeah, but the top's not just going to change. It has to come from the bottom, right? And that's what we're doing. And I will say that even this is encouraging. And I know that meetings like this have been happening a lot. And I've been in different types of circles that are doing Black and API solidarity events. Somebody said community events. And so I had written that like we need to share and celebrate our cultures together more. And I'm seeing it. We just need to invite our friends and make these bigger and bigger. In response, or just to like bounce off of what Honey was saying, the system is corrupt. And like the policing system is fucked up. So, oops. And I don't have, I don't have the stats for this. I appreciate that, some people are citing like FBI crimes and what's been reported, but we all know that there's so much more that goes unreported. We probably all have experienced things that we don't report. And so I would postulate that it is very likely that a lot of crimes that are perpetrated by white offenders are just not reported, or even if somebody makes the first step to report, it doesn't go higher and people aren't apprehended. I think that as like comedians, musicians, as artists, we feel the sense of community before the larger community does, because we're like our own subsection of people. And I think that we have so many different ages, even in this on this Zoom, and like the language and the attitudes and the knowledge that we have has evolved. So it also starts from the bottom of us acknowledging, as some of y'all already have, like our biases that we grew up with, because it goes back further than the Trump administration or the pandemic. Colonization has played a part in the development of all of our ancestry. And like colorism exists in every single culture, like Asians included, especially East Asians. East Asians are the most racist in a lot of ways. Like, that's just the fact, right, Kiki? Like our parents, our grandparents were very racist against people who had darker skin and got mad at us if we tanned. And so that's something that we have to address. So that's another bottom up thing where we have to address our own biases and then the people immediately around us. And that is how we can branch out and unite as a larger community. So anyways, I guess my suggestion for what to do is talk to the people at home and expand your events, whatever type of art or community gathering that you do, just invite more people and branch out, go to places that you don't normally go. Because usually when you go to a new space, like a restaurant or a neighborhood, people are generally friendly and they like that you are trying, right? Like we shouldn't just believe what we're seeing on social media, because anybody now can create a piece of content that looks legitimate. And that's one of the scariest things.
Yep, I just wanted to chime in. I was agreeing with what Honey and a couple of others were saying earlier, that the media's representation of African Americans has always been, both on the news and social media, has always been negative. So, nowadays what goes viral on social media is not necessarily what's true, but what causes conflict and what tends to stimulate people, visually. So I think there's a lot of fake news that somebody in the chat mentioned earlier, that we do need to be careful about not taking that to be the truth. But it's so hard not to get affected by what we see on social media. So I do agree that it's up to the community leaders to not to overweigh any one particular clip or any one viral clip, but from spreading that kind of negative sentiment to the rest of the community. And I do agree with Patty when she said that there's a lot of unreported news that there's no objective conclusive evidence that all the anti-Asian crimes were perpetrated by Black people, and so until we have that kind of concrete data, I feel like we shouldn't jump to conclusions.
I don't think that anybody should discount, or at this point discounts, the fact that the system is meant to pit people against each other, and that certain groups within our countries have been passed over and treated wrongly. I also don't think that I think it is insufficient for us to rely upon the statistics from the exact systems that we seek to change and use that as our touch points for these things. Yes, like there are reports of hate crimes against Asians that show that white people are main perpetrators, but most of those crimes become like verbal things or things of that nature. I think what everybody is more concerned about are these attacks against Asian elders. And yes, we can use crime as oh, they were robbing people, they were muggings. That can be true. At the same time, the way in which they carry out these crimes and the types of violence that they commit during these crimes can't be denied. And if we were to say that, yeah, we're only seeing these things on the news, then yes, we could say that the media is skewed. And I don't disagree that the media is skewed. And I don't disagree that the media is designed to pit people against each other and groups at the bottom against each other. We also don't have to ignore the fact that when Asian immigrants came here, they were unproportionately given funds to start businesses within Black communities. None of those things are untrue. It can still be true, even with those things, that there are groups of members from the Black community targeting members of the Asian community. And I am on the street every day, and I come from a place where Blacks and Asians get along. Some of my best friends are Blacks. I did 10 years in prison, and I fought along Blacks against whites during race riots more than once. And you can check my paperwork. And you can go to Six and Hoover, you can go to Avalon, and you can go to many places in the Northwest and ask about me in Black communities, and they will say, yeah, I know that motherfucker, and he's with the shit. So I don't discount any of these things. And I went hard for Black Lives Matter, and I always have. And when I knew that Black men were being murdered unproportionately by police before the statistics showed it, I knew that for a fact because I lived inside those neighborhoods. We are now asking the world to understand our shared experiences and what we are seeing every single fucking day. For us to deny those things is unacceptable. And I can still say Black Lives Matter, fuck the police, fuck all cops, and still say that Asian elders shouldn't be getting kicked in the face by younger, able-bodied people. And they should not be the targets of those. And yes, we can say, okay, we know that Asians carry money, they don't trust banks, and for that reason, they are targets. That's still profiling somebody based upon ethnic makeup. Cedric said something about recognizing bias, and I really do agree with that. And we should all be aware of that, and it goes both ways, regardless of how you want to do it. And it's also, I don't think it's accurate that most of the attacks that we have seen are just because of mental health. I would argue that, or I will state that my own experience and what I do see, because I am tapped into the community, I'm on the street, I'm everywhere on social media, that it's not just a mental health thing. Mental health is a large portion of it. And yes, socioeconomic factors come about in terms of understanding why this happens. And yeah, we need to change the fucking system. We need to start the whole fucking thing over. But we don't do that by saying, hey, okay, let's talk about, we can go to our lawmakers, because you're asking to operate within a system that's inherently corrupt and hope that they will be ethical, right? You need to start the whole thing over. And yeah, that's what we should all be working towards in a big picture. But for our community, we would ask the same thing that any other community would ask when we see these things going on. During 2020, everybody was asked to look at the truth now, and everybody wholeheartedly accepted that. We're now asking people to see what they see and understand what we're saying. This is not new in the Bay Area. I come from LA and it was not like this. Right? In the Northwest, it's not like this. I've lived in both places. So when I came to San Francisco, I wanted to believe this was not true. I really did. And I actually argued with my own communities about it. My best friend to this day and my business partner is Black. And we made a platform off of Black Lives Matter because we were sending money and we were speaking out against these things like openly and viciously. So we can support both things and still be honest about it and like, hey, shit is fucked up and we got to fix it. And it does start with like our own community. We have to talk to each other. You fear what you don't know. So actionable step, yeah, we need to get to know each other. Another actionable step is like the same thing that anybody else would ask. If I see somebody from Southern America who's a vendor being targeted because he's a street vendor, they know that he might not be documented, he carries cash. I can say that, and I see Asian people doing it, I can pull up my people like, yo, that's not okay, right? Or the same way that we understand that white supremacy is weaved within like the whole existence of everybody on this earth, and that we need to look for those things. Yeah, we should. And yes, that's the thing that is like largely affecting the blanket thing that's making all of this happen. That doesn't mean that we can't do the other things too. And the things that we can do every day, like listening to somebody else who's telling what their lived experience is. And then also recognize like, hey, if there's something that I can do like on a local level or on a one-on-one level, like whether that be by language, whether that's like a physical action or anything like that, like we need to be looking at those things. We are halted from doing those things by denying the experiences of the communities that's reporting this to you. We are halted from doing those things by relying on just statistics from the systems which we seek to destroy.
The question I had was in regards to when y'all say you're looking for support from the Black community, are you looking for figures, numbers? Are you looking for just like more direct support? What would that look like? Because I feel like it's one of those interests. It's a vagueness just because it kind of relies on like that monolithic type of idea. But at the same time, never would want to like dismiss anyone's lived experience, but at the same time, just curious on what type of support are you looking out for that shows you that folks got your back?
Yeah, I think it's conversations like this and just like it's not. I understand exactly what you're saying. I also just think like it's a very simple answer, right? It's conversations like this, and we know it's not all Black people. We know that it's a small segment of like one community, right? And we can also like take that further and parse that and like, okay, it's a small segment of this community from this section, from this geographical area. And that supports, I think, everything that everybody is saying here, but it also doesn't ignore the fact that like, hey, we just need to have these conversations. Like if we're hearing these things, we're seeing these things, we need to acknowledge them and we need to talk about it. My thing about like the statistics is simply that like when we do that, like we start to like lose sight of the micro. And yeah, we need to change the macro, but all of us live within the micro. My elders are within the micro, right? I have to walk the street every day, and I can't just walk the street and like, hey, babe, let's go get dim sum. Because I know that when I go to Chinatown, that there are people that are showing up there, carloads full of people looking to rob old people or looking to rob the merchants there. So then it's like, so now the place that I live feels like prison to me again. Oh wait, I got lost, my bad. So I think like having these conversations, right? And people just being honest, like, yo, there's racist Asian people. There's people in the Black community that have that discriminate towards other people for whatever reason, right? So let's just recognize those things and like, yo, we're not okay with it either way unless we're discriminating against the system or the people that are seeking to like pit us against each other. So genuine conversations, like people just being honest. If somebody is within those conversations, if we have differences in point of view, like let's see where those differences come from, and let's see like where we do align, and like grow what we do align, and find understanding for the things that we don't align on. I don't have an answer for like the broader scale or anything like that, because I don't want to just speak for all Black people or like say, oh, I expect this from Black people, because that's not fair either.
But
No, that was perfect.
You just said it. That's all I've been saying. It got to start with conversation, and it got to start with honest, admitting what the hell I done, admitting where my fault's at, and then going at it from there, and get rid of all the damn stupidity. That's the bottom line. Because I mean, if we can't have a real conversation about this, then it's not gonna happen. And then the other thing, this is from my point of view. I'm not gonna speak. I can only speak for my damn self and what I see in San Francisco around me. As a black man, we don't have control over our own damn children in our community. So we can't even get them to stop committing crimes against ourselves, let alone against you. Can we speak up more about it? I think for me, sometimes we get more engrossed in our own shit, excuse my good English, than thinking about outsiders. And, sometimes the admit part is that look like Chinese people got it going on. Have your own community, have homes, have this, that, and the other. So they ain't lacking for nothing. We always have this other excuse in the black community about how everybody else can come to America and come up, and we still in the same position without taking responsibility for our damn selves. So with all of those things, and I'm not making no excuses for it, but I know what I can do is when I do see wrong and it's wrong, check it and be able to go to my community and say what it is that it ain't right. Be able to go to my community and be able to talk to the person and the individual. I'm in the business of assisting and helping people and trying to unite people. So if that's what I'm doing, then that's what I have to do and being able to admit it. Because I know we as a people a lot of times don't think we have to apologize to nobody about nothing.
Yeah, someone mentioned mental health issue for why some of this stuff's happening. I'm kind of over the mental health thing. When every time someone does something like bad, they go, "Oh, that person's just crazy. Let's be sympathetic." No, there's people who are out here who are just fucking shitty. Let's just call it like you call it. It's crime. It's terrible. And elders, unfortunately, and there's a spotlight on you guys now, but like it's in every community because, like you say, they're easy targets. It's my own grandma was knocked down and robbed by a black dude in Chicago, in the area where she lived. God rest her soul. She's passed, since, but it's just like people say, it's someone out there who's hungry or who wants whatever they fucking want, and money's the way to get it. And how do I get it the easiest? I don't know, that old person right there. I'm gonna knock them over and take their stuff. And it's a crime. And as much as I would love to say it's like something like hateful, it's a socioeconomic thingy. Like and crimes are classified how they're classified. Like, I mean, hate crimes are pretty obvious. But crimes against older people, there's a name for that. There's an actual thing for it. It's why scammers on computers are constantly sending emails to little old ladies trying to get their credit card informations and stuff. But I mean, that's a whole other topic I want to tackle. But as far as the Asian and Black community thing, I think people need to see us united. They need to see how well we get along because it ruins the narrative that we don't. I don't know if you guys watch TV at all, but Disney Plus's #1 show right now has Black and Asian leads, The Acolyte. It's fucking crushing right now on Disney Plus, and it's fucking amazing. And it's got Black and Asian leads. The TV show Warrior, Black, White, Asian leads, fucking crushing right now. It's my favorite show, like literally of all time. People need to see that we're united, or the fucking narrative passes. I would love to do something like this in person. I would love to fill a theater full of people, take questions, have talk, do comedy, shift the narrative.
To chime in, I wanted to respond to Honey. I wanted to say thank you for asking that question. I think it's really important that as we're having these conversations, that we're also asking each other questions to truly get to that point of understanding. So I'm a member of Dear Community, and I would say that when we started, we had to work on like our mission statement. And one of the things that we did was we started studying other movements, other organizations. We looked at the NAACP and we looked at the Black Lives Matter movement. And we really, we wanted to embrace that spirit, especially since so many of us were also, out doing the protests for BLM as well. And here we are now becoming accidental activists in the whole Stop Asian Hate movement. And so throughout all of that, we learned a lot. And I would say that in regards to how you can show the support is, in the same ways that you wanted that support for the Black Lives Matter movement. We also have rallies and protests. It would be amazing for you to show up. We also have a lot of different events, and it would be amazing for you to be in that space with us, help people get comfortable with you. Cedric Akbar actually came to one of our events last year in Chinatown. We hosted our Chinatown Friday, and it fell on June 19th. And we felt that it was really important to bring that education. And Cedric Akbar came and did a speech. We only had like three tables in a Chinatown restaurant, but the entire restaurant actually quieted down and learned something new that day. And we know that even with Juneteenth, like it's so new that even your coworkers might not understand what it is. So for a community like Chinatown, where there are unfortunately some fears and possibly irrational fears around the Black community, this was still something that they wanted to listen to, and they really appreciated having that piece of information. And so in regards to how we can support one another, let's just do what has been so successful and should be admired and honored. Black Lives Matter has paved the way for so many movements and more to come. And there's already kind of a formula there, and it's about showing up. It's about also like putting out Stop Asian Hate stickers on your things as well. Make those sweaters for us. We also, anything that we can think of, like making this plan, hopefully by the end of today, in about 15 minutes, we can make a plan where we can all meet up.
I heard what was my man Nat was talking about. I totally agree. Like we gotta redo the damn system. But I know that ain't gonna happen overnight, and the ones that's got it going ain't gonna give up without a fight. So the only reason I try to say it the way I say it, it ain't really the best approach, but it's the only approach I can think of, is how effective we can be on the bottom and move and expand it as close to the top as we can for that kind of efficiency, if that makes sense. You got to be able to strengthen your borders and secure those things for like community and uniting and everything else as far out as you can. Otherwise, we just keep having our little divisive groups, like I got my BLM, or I got my Native American group, and everybody just kind of still divided. But we got to find these ways of just throwing that to the side and saying, I'm a human being. Can we be a human? Can we work together like that? Because I'm a human just like you, and I get along with you. I probably like similar things, might not. But we can't be just too quick to be so independent and all this kind of stuff. And to preach it to ourselves all the time, day in and day out, ain't working so well, because we're the group here. It's the group that's not here that we're trying to bring in. Some of these people don't even care because their lives are good. Like they ain't going to try to do any kind of change. So we got to figure out how we broaden this gap bigger and bigger. And it has to be where if a rich person's out there on the streets and they see a poor person, they go, wait a minute, let me even this out. They actually have an inclination to do it. But right now they don't care less because their lives are good. But the other thing I was going to say is when we have these groups like community Zoom groups, it might work good to have breakout rooms so that we can talk independently and come up with things like strategies. And then we can come back kind of in the big group and discuss those things. I think that would be helpful too.
A lot of the Asian community feels it's almost like being gaslit. If we go back to when the Stop Asian Hate movement started, there was initial support because it was a movement against what was deemed white supremacy, like all of this kind of like racism that arose after the pandemic. But then when the attention started turning to the violent street crime that was being shown, and it didn't fit the white supremacy narrative anymore, then the support just kind of ended, because we are so used to only tackling white racism, and then when it doesn't fit that narrative, it becomes suddenly an uncomfortable subject. And the way I look at it, it's not racism, but it's racially motivated attacks because our elders are being racially profiled as vulnerable. And So a lot of Asians are afraid to speak out about it. They're afraid to be called racist for calling it out. And this was actually it was intensified by Mayor Eric Adams. I don't know if any of you saw the video that I shared where he was referring to the protests that took place in New York, where the Asian community was upset about homeless shelter being opened right in the heart of their community, in the very same neighborhood where these elders are getting attacked. So they were naturally frightened. And then Mayor Adams said, well, that's racism. You know, he said that the people in this shelter are going to be mostly single Black men. And so for the Asian community to protest it is racism. And I think that was huge gaslighting, because it's not a racist, it's not racism, it's a fear of safety. And it's almost like just completely dismissing their genuine concerns, because they have seen people being attacked. They know people who've been attacked. They know people who are terrified to go out on the street and just living in fear. And so to be told that these fears are illegitimate and they're actually just racism, it's insulting. And so I think that's the kind of support that the community needs, to feel that there's solidarity from all communities, that you know, that we should be able to talk about this without being shamed into silence.
Absolutely hear you. That kind of brings up what I was talking about earlier when I mentioned mental health earlier. And I said, like, it's not an excuse for any act of violence or for any of that. At the same time, mental health is directly just connected to housing. Mental health is directly connected to money or lack thereof. And the way that we shape these narratives and report on them, just like how you described as Mayor Eric Adams of New York City, he's a cop. Him pushing that narrative works right on in, because he just shucks and jives. He does what he needs to do to just kind of get his position, get whatever he needs to do, and plays these games that garners that exact same reaction. It makes people at pause of supporting people that need help, because now they're forced to choose. They're made to seem like they're on like this little trolley problem, where they have to either decide of, I have to think about the well-being of strangers. In this case, you're talking about homes for people who don't have a home, or in between homes, or who do not have the funds or the means to obtain one, because that's its own issue that we can talk about for housing, versus the people who have been targeted for assaults and muggings, and having to say, hey, can I actually voice my discomfort because we're now putting a shelter here? And it's that exact same methodology of kind of like playing like the two communities against each other. Like, that's how it works. When you got enough money to equip NYPD, they have a budget of a small country. They have a budget for a small country, and they can't figure out how to get people homes. Like, those are those big issues that we're talking about. But going back to the small stuff, or like I like how Nat said it, kind of like the micro over the macro. And that micro, it's just talking to neighbors, knowing who's in these communities. Once again, stuff like this, where we are, even though all over the world, this is international, we're all over the world, yet we can still come here, share if we have no
gotta want that, honey. We gotta want that, and a lot of people don't, and a lot of people are comfortable even with their shit.
Was to piggyback off of his point about the homeless shelter, I read about that actually, and how the community came together to oppose it. We do stuff like that in Palmdale, Lancaster all the time, because statistics will prove that people with mental health or drug abuse problems, or tendencies towards criminality, are going to be filling those spaces. And then there's a percentage of people who are just down on their luck and just need help. And then you filter that into like people's neighborhoods, and now you've got an uptick in crime, and people are going, oh, I don't know what happened. And it's like, well, you put this thing in the middle of this community that takes work So we've actually in our communities had to push these things to the outskirts of our cities. So like no, I'm with you on that. And the fact that he called them racist and he knows the stats is bullshit. And they won't debate people who know the facts, because anyone who knows the facts will have told them straight up there's going to be an uptick in crime, an uptick in theft, an uptick of robberies, an uptick of drug abuse, and an uptick in mentally ill people running around without their medications and up to their own devices.
I really love this discussion. I was coming into tonight really emotional and stressed because I didn't know which way it would go. But I was just like, if it's gonna be messy, it'll be messy. But it was 100 times better than I could have ever imagined. We had great discussions. The main thing I wanted to come out of this talk was to be acknowledged that there are members of the Black community attacking Asians. And I'm just gonna bring out a couple of examples. For me, the specific incident that was the catalyst was when an Asian grandma was attacked at a park and she was left there. She was 91 and she passed away a year later. And then for a lot of us in this chat from the Asian community, like Nat, Tam, we got activated after Grandpa Vitra Ratanapakdi was attacked. He wasn't robbed. He was just shoved against a garage door and he died that way. And his daughter went back to wipe the blood. This wasn't a mugging. So it's a culmination of attacks like these that make us really question, like why would you do that? It must be Asian hate. So when Kiki posted that video, I think it was only natural for her to ask, not based on that one incident, but a collection of so many incidents that happened over the year, was it Asian hate? Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how to close this out. I feel like this is the beginning of a really great thing. Hopefully we'll see you again next month. I mean, going back to having recurring conversations and things, that is how we framed Dear Community. We started with weekly dinners in Chinatown after citizen patrols to build community and create space so that people can debrief and have conversations about big or small things. And we've had almost 200 dinners. So recurring events, I do feel like work. Small things work. I think to close out, just to give ourselves homework, I mean, I want to personally, Kiki, if you can get a good screenshot of all of us today, like I want
got a lot. I kept
yeah,
taking.
I know you did probably, but I want to share on my social media to show that we are united. We are creating this space and we are starting really difficult conversations. And like everyone already said, the first steps is to show up, is to speak up and to initiate conversation. But that's it.
Oh, thank you, Amy. Thank you, everybody that spoke. Donnie, Cedric, Honey, Nat, Terry, Darren, Lane, Patty, Tam.
I got one more thing. I got one more thing. I got one more thing.
Nat.
Let's go, Nat.
Go.
I think that's something that's easy to identify with, and I don't think there's just like anything that can like from bias that can invade that, is that we are all fighting the same thing.
Yes.
Right? Like when we remind each other we are all fighting the same thing, and that we will be better off fighting that thing together, and that when we fight against each other, that thing starts to win more. And that's like every single action, that's every single thought, that's where you spend your money, that's like the post you likes, like the comments that the comments that we leave, the comments that we check, right? All these things are all actions that we can do on a daily basis. And when it feels insurmountable, you can always do the one small thing, and that's a little bit of something is better than a fuck ton of nothing.
Yeah.
Amen.
I agree. And I agree, like if any of you don't agree with the mayor, what he said, make a video, put it on your social media, and
fuck that punk.
And speak up for the AAPI community.
So there you have it. I think it was a really good chat and there was so much covered, but I think each one of us could have said a whole lot more as well if we were given the time. One thing I thought this conversation highlighted was the fact that, as many of us are already aware, each one of us is in a different rabbit hole. So what we in the East Asian community are seeing on our social media feeds isn't the same as what other people are seeing. So the size of the problem in our eyes is much bigger than what other people are aware. In fact, some people, as one of the contributors pointed out, didn't even know it was a problem. But I do agree with what a couple of contributors pointed out, that identity politics is so highly inflamed on social media, and there is a definite push to keep us divided along race or gender or sexuality or whatever it is. So I concede that the racial element of this violence is perhaps overhyped, because violence is violence, right? It shouldn't matter what the race of the perpetrator or the race of the victim is. But where it does matter, I think, is in the response of the authorities and of the media towards these incidents. Because as we've seen in the UK recently, there's a lot of talk about two-tier policing. And I feel that the silence on Black and Asian violence in the US is an example of two-tier policing as well. And I think there definitely is two-tier media coverage in the West, where the identity of a criminal is all over the headlines if the person can be labeled as a white supremacist or a far-right extremist. But when it doesn't fit that narrative, it's downplayed. And in the case of the anti-Asian violence in the US, it's not even mentioned at all most of the time. I mean, sure, these events do get limited local news coverage, but where is the national outrage or the international outrage? Another issue I would have liked to have talked about in greater depth, but I didn't have the time, was the fact that these cities where all these crimes are taking place are Democrat-run cities. And it's not a chicken egg situation I'm talking about here, because it's a fact that most people who live in big cities vote Democrat, so that is why they're Democrat-run cities. But I feel there's a definite resistance among Democrat voters to call out the failings of Democrat governments. Because let's face it, these crimes would not be occurring on the scale they are if the government wasn't so easy on crime in the first instance. A lot of victims don't get the justice they deserve, and a lot of the criminals are getting off really lightly with just community service orders, and then they're right back in the community again. When the government takes a soft-touch approach to hard drugs and street crime, these things are bound to happen. And it should be acceptable to talk about these issues without racializing them. Because from where I'm looking, it's not a racial issue. The real issue is the failure of the system. But to end on a positive note, I felt that there was a strong sense of solidarity in this group and a genuine desire to talk about these things regardless of political leaning. So what are your thoughts on all of this? Was there anything in the conversation that stood out to you, or anything that you've observed perhaps that wasn't covered? Let me know in the comments. And if you are a part of either of these two communities, I encourage you to watch and share this with your friends and family. Keep the conversation going.